Black suppression started because of slavery. Slavery began in America in the early 17th century. It was the main source for the economy. Because of this, they were seen as less than and less intelligent, even though they started going to school in the mid-1830s. Because of this, they were only being used for manual labor. They were treated like property rather than people, and were even denied basic human rights, and even racial stereotypes were inputs, thus giving Black Americans a bad view in the public eye. Although slavery was abolished, white Americans still had a racist and negative view, which later caused social and economic impacts that continue to affect them both back then and even now in the modern workforce.
Racial discrimination in jobs has been a long and painful part of American history. After slavery ended, many African Americans were still denied fair employment opportunities. During the era of Jim Crow laws, Black Americans were often restricted to low-paying and labor-intensive jobs and were legally separated or segregated from their opportunities. Even when equally or more qualified, they were overlooked simply because of the color of their skin. During World War II, African Americans helped build the nation's defense industries, yet still faced unequal pay and limited advancement. It wasn't until the Civil Rights Movement that major changes began to take place. Laws that were passed to prohibit discrimination in hiring, wages, and promotions, marking important progress towards equality. However, discrimination didn't simply disappear. Today, African Americans still face challenges such as wage gaps, hiring bias, and underrepresentation in leadership positions. Studies have shown that applicants with traditionally African American sounding names are less likely to receive callbacks compared to others with identical qualifications. While these may not always be visible, they continue to affect opportunities and economic stability. While America has made progress in addressing social discrimination, employment, and inequality has continued in different forms, from the restrictions of the Jim Crow era to modern hiring bias, wage gaps. African Americans have repeatedly faced barriers that limit economic opportunities, yet workplace discrimination is only part of the story. Broader systems and policies have also shaped who has access to stable jobs and financial security. To fully understand why these disparities still exist today, we must examine how issues like the crack cocaine epidemic and policies surrounding it further impact African American communities and long-term employment opportunities.
In the 80s, crack was spread rapidly through, everywhere, but mostly in low-income and urban neighborhoods. And though it was a problem everywhere, 85% of arrests made were African American men. The punishment for crack was a very, very much higher sentence than normal cocaine, which was more accessible to white people. The issue was treated more as a criminal issue than a public health issue, which created the narrative that Black communities were the cause of the drug craze, when in reality, or the government conspiracy that is going around, is that drug dealers are being paid by the government to distribute cheap crack to low-income areas. The biggest dealer at the time, Ricky Ross, has gone on record to say, "I believe that they felt it was more valuable to sacrifice a particular sector of America and a race of people in America in order to save the whole country." So to sum everything up, the economic neglect due to prejudice and stereotypes led to African Americans working lower income jobs and living in lower income neighborhoods, which caused them to be targeted by the government. They were in prison and forced into labor.
Incarcerated workers in the South, which were primarily made up of Black men, were exploited for their labor and work in farms and industries where they would farm for beef, soybeans, corn, and wheat that would then be sold off to food franchises like McDonald's, Walmart, Target, Costco, and Whole Foods. Many incarcerated workers did not have any workers' rights and were unable to unionize. They were also paid little pay, if any pay at all, from 13 to 15 cents an hour on average. They were permitted no sick days or off days. The reliance on free labor was also used to run these big costly prisons in the South. For a lot of these prisons, they didn't want to hire actual workers because these prisons already cost a lot to even have the lights on. So they would use a lot of the Black African Americans who are already in prison in the system to run the laundry rooms, the kitchens, to do janitorial work in the prison system. Out of the 1.2 million people who are incarcerated in the U.S. each year, 800,000 are prison laborers and are forced into employment. 80% of the employed in maintenance are working in the jail, and of the other 20%, 17% work for government-run businesses such as the DMV, call centers. They work in public hospitals, doing laundry and doing dirty work. And then they also help in public projects for oil spills or any dangerous hazardous chemical materials that are spilled. They help clean them up for the cities. The other 3% of that 20% work in the private sector, where they work in harvesting goods and in the service as well. The PIECP, the Prison Industry Enhancement Certification Program, it allows the prisoners to work directly under the prison, or they're contracted out to the big companies such as Walmart, Target, Costco, Whole Foods. The reason this is still legal today is because the 13th Amendment allows for slavery to be legalized as a punishment for crime in the United States. This is also a big reason why the black codes were placed in prison African Americans over any little thing, and it's why continued. It allows for the continuity of black Americans to be imprisoned over small things, over theft, weed, and cocaine, even today. The U.S. average in the United States for imprisonment out of 100,000 people is 614. This is significantly higher compared to other countries such as the UK. We're 4 times higher, and then Canada, and we're 7 times higher. In the South, 13 out of the 16 southern states are much higher than the U.S. average. Notably, we have Louisiana with 1,067 people out of 100,000 being incarcerated, and in Mississippi, 1,020 people being incarcerated out of 100,000. To comparison, we have El Salvador, which has 1,086 people. El Salvador is most notable for having big gangs and having a very large prison system. So I think just the fact that we're only like 20 people off is very strange. 12% of the U.S. is made up of black Americans. However, 32% of prisoners are black. Black men are also much more likely to be in low-wage jobs, while white men tend to be in the higher paid jobs. So what this means is that black men will most likely to be employed within the system, like within the jail system, where they are not paid at all, while white men tend to be contracted out to these companies where, although the pay is still less than the minimum wage to the U.S., they're still getting paid higher compared to black men. In conclusion, African American oppression dates back to slavery from the 17th century, and the racist stereotypes from that era continue to prevail even today. As black people continue to be discriminated against in the workforce and away from societal issues such as drug abuse, child neglect, and gang violence, American society continues to ignore how the government's involvement and even other fellow Americans continue to uphold these racist stereotypes with a disproportionate incarceration of black people and the displacement and breaking up of African American communities, neighborhoods, and families.